Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to cover the full moon or Purnima for 29th September 2023. And this is from a Vedic astrology perspective. And it seems like what I gather the theme for this moment in time is the power of empathy. All right, so a note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only. It should not be considered medical, financial, professional, life advice of any kind. If there is a need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. If you're new to Vedic astrology or Jyotish or my videos, please know that all of my teaching videos on the subject are in the concepts playlist. They can all be found there. And whenever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means that there's a teaching video on that subject. Also, if you're new to Vedic astrology, some of those videos are going to be helpful if you're a beginner and you're listening to this talk. And those videos are Introduction to the Constellations or Rashis, North, South, and East Indian style charts, Introduction to Navigating Birth Chart, the Lugna, also known as the Ascendant, Rising Sign, First House, planetary aspects, nakshatras or lunar mansions. And also, I have a whole playlist on each of the planets and their symbolism. That's in the planets or grahas playlist. And obviously, for today, the most important planet to look at is the moon or Chandra. So let's get into it. So we have a full moon coming up on September 29th at 5:56 Eastern Standard Time. That's in the morning. So if we look at this is a chart for that moment in time. If we look at the dasha sequence for that moment in time, so the dasha sequence is a planetary sequence, a planetary period. It is going to be Saturn, Moon, K2, Venus. And so just looking at these planets, you might see that the energies here, just very briefly, again, this isn't enough to go by, but just to give us an indication of which planets are going to be more active and their symbolism. When you put these planets together, you could see something like unexpected delays or strange relationships involving money. And that's because of this chart. The moon is the lord of the 11th house or the house of income, and Venus is lord of the second house or the house of savings. So it looks like there's some money matters going on, and it looks like it's affecting relationships. Emotions are running high. So the panchang data for this moment in time. So the panchang is the solar lunar calendar, Indian calendar. It gives a lot of, again, astrological data and information. So it's in the Amanta Masa or the uh, new moon month. There are different ways of counting the moon cycles in Indian culture. Most of the time they go from new moon to new moon, but in some parts of the country they go from full moon to full moon. In any case, the Amantamasa during this moment of time is Bhadrapada. The day lord is Jupiter, and the hour lord is, or the hora lord is Sun. The moon nakshatra is in Uttara Bhadrapada. The tithi is the 15th Purnima, because obviously this is the last moment before the sun starts to wane. And this is the Shukla Paksha, or the brighter waxing phase of the moon. The karana is bhava, the second one bhava, and the yoga here is the 11th one or vritti. So you may not understand all these terms, that's okay. I'm going to get into enough detail. You may not need too much of it, but if you're into it, this will, round out the information that I present. All right, so let's start at the top of the chart. This is a North Indian style chart. And the top square diamond is what we call the lugna. It's also known as the rising sign ascendant in our first house. And that kind of is the basis or starting point for analysis when we look at charts. So this lugna, it's a Virgo or Kanya Rashi or constellation, which is a dual earth sign. And the rising sign nakshatra is in Uttara Phalguni. Within the first house, we have the sun, which is in Hasta nakshatra. We also have a combust moon, or excuse me, combust Mars, which happens to be the yogi, which is the planet that represents one of the planets that represents wealth in the chart. So again, we're seeing money again. It's also Mars in this chart is also a Chitra graha, so it's a planet that symbolizes kind of a vulnerability or wound. Yeah, and Mars is in the nakshatra of Chitra. So let's go through that. That's already quite a bit. So Virgo, Kanya being a dual Earth sign. Earth signs tend to be very practical in nature. And a dual sign means that it's going to kind of flex back and forth. The dual signs tend to have kind of two sides of them, if you will. So this is a sign or a constellation that's practical in nature, but also shifts. Uttara Phalguni is a nakshatra that symbolizes enjoyment of the finer things of life. But attached to that is a notion of having a mission in life as well. So it's not just all fun and games, but enjoyment of things with a certain purpose or focus. Yeah. The sun being in Hasta nakshatra, the symbol of that is a hand. So it could be that somebody's very skillful at something. Um, and it can also mean, especially because this is in the ascendant or the lugna, which indicates not only the physical body of somebody, but also their personality. This is somebody who can be very hands-on with their work, because sun symbolizes work and career. It can also indicate somebody who's a little bit grabby, frankly. Um, so that'll play out more as we get into more of the storyline that seems to be playing out here. Mars is Kamba, so Mars is a planet that symbolizes leadership, as does the sun. So because we have the two planets that represent leadership in Lugna here, this is somebody who's a leader. Sun represents more of a sort of a royalty, king, president type of leadership. Mars represents more of a commander-in-chief, CEO type of leadership. So somebody who's more, again, somebody who might be more of a figurehead potentially, and somebody who might be more of a hands-on. Again, we're getting another hands-on indication here. Roll up your sleeves and be on the front, like doing the work type person. And Mars is in the nakshatra of Chitra, which the symbol of that is a gemstone. And so Chitra um, has this notion of being very structure oriented. Like I tend to see people who are into architecture and construction have important placements in Chitra. So that also again leads to this idea of somebody being practical and somebody being organized. Also, Virgo is ruled by the planet of Mercury, and Mercury is a planet that symbolizes being very detail oriented, as well as very heady, kind of in the head, thoughtful, analytical, organized, that sort of thing. So we're kind of seeing it play out in different ways here. So we're getting what we call a confluence of energy. So if we put all this together, just that, we're looking at somebody who's practical, a hands-on leader with a mission. And because of the Sun and Mars here, those are both fiery planets. So they tend to be, if we're looking at Ayurveda or traditional Indian medicine, somebody who's going to have a lot of pitta or fire energy. And what that means for the person is they're going to have a lot of inflammation. This person going to have a lot of inflammation. Especially on the skin or something obvious, because that's what the first house represents, physically or medically. But the other thing is in the mind, they're going to be somebody who's very organized, a management type, probably impatient with this much fire. And then, when the pitta gets imbalanced, it can lead to somebody who's rigid, kind of controlling, a bit of a perfectionist. And because Mars is combust here, combustion means that the true planet is very close to the sun, typically, on average about 10 degrees close to the sun. And because it's so close to the sun, it becomes eclipsed. So I have a video on this. You can check out more of that if you want to. But so you don't tend to see the outer aspects of the planet. They don't tend to manifest in an external way as much as the internal qualities. So Mars is a planet that represents innovation, rebelliousness, and somebody who starts off like a pioneer, a trailblazer type, somebody who's courageous, maybe even potentially like a military or what is it? Like law enforcement type, um, management type. So again, we're kind of seeing that. In any case, you won't see the outer qualities, but the inner qualities of being competitive, maybe, of being courageous, maybe, of being, rebellious. So this is, when you have a Mars like this might be somebody who's actually passive aggressive. So on the surface, they may seem fairly well-meaning and they get along with everybody, but they'll have these inner leanings towards being aggressive, but like again in kind of inadvertent ways. Yeah. So the other thing we have going on here, you can see this double-sided green arrow between Mercury and the Sun. There's a parivartana or exchange of houses. I have a video on that as well, between the Sun and Mercury. So you can visually swap Mercury and Sun here. So by bringing Mercury into the first house, into the constellation that it owns, that means Mercury is going to bring some strength to this person by strengthening the first house. That means that they're going to have a fairly strong physical constitution as well as personality. The other thing, when you bring Mercury into the first house, it's going to be, not only is it strong because it's in its own house, but it's going to have what we call bala or directional strength. Okay. So that's going to make Mercury even stronger. So when you swap Mercury and Sun, Mercury is going to have two reasons why it's very strong. So it's going to be a very strong Mercury. And oftentimes when you see Mercury in its own house, or you see a really strong Mercury in a chart, that means somebody is really interested in business, especially their own business. So this might be somebody who's an entrepreneur. Let's see. What else about Mercury? Okay, so there's a lot about Mercury. So Mars, being a yogi graha, which represents wealth, which is a wealth indicator for this chart, Mercury is both an aviyogi and a duplicate yogi for this chart. So an aviyogi is a planet that represents lack of wealth, and the duplicate yogi is sort of like the yogi, but less so. So it's like a less strong yogi. So Mercury, which is a planet that's dual in nature, flips back into its own constellation, which is dual in nature. And then again, we're getting more money indications here. So Mercury is both something that indicates wealth as well as a lack of wealth. So yeah, you're already seeing that there's some confusion. The other thing is when Mercury flips into its own sign, is in its own sign, especially when it's in a Kendra or a Trikona house. Those are the four squares in the middle, or the three, um, one diamond at the top, and then there's two triangles, and that forms a triangle there. Those houses. It forms what we call a Bhadra yoga, which is a Raj yoga or a yoga. Yoga is a combination of planets. The yoga that indicates power and strength. So this person is going to be known for their intellect, for their intelligence, for their organization, for their analysis, rational mind. And Mercury happens to be in Purva Phalguni, in the 12th house. The Purva Phalguni, similar to Uttara Phalguni, where this is somebody who likes to have fun, enjoy the finer things of life. But with Purva Phalguni, you don't get the indication of having so much of a mission or a purpose so much. Um, yeah, so again, when we flip Mercury into the first house, we get somebody who has strength of body, personality, detail-oriented. And because of the combination of the leadership, Sun, Mars, with this Mercury, I was getting, rather than getting a president or CEO, this might be a CFO. So this could be a chief financial officer. That's what I was getting from this chart. Again, maybe entrepreneur, highly intelligent. The other thing is with these two fire planets in the first house and this interchange between the Sun and Mercury, this is somebody whose mental wheels are always turning. This can be efficiency manager, but there's also a tension here between somebody who has a public position, first house, and the 12th house of isolated places. So while they are up front and in the public eye, it seems like this is also somebody who likes to get away and needs to get away to recuperate and recharge their batteries and relax, because again, there's all this mental churning that seems to go on with this person. And because there's this dual nature as well, this is somebody who can have difficulty making decisions. They could end up in analysis paralysis. There's also this intensity with this 2 fire planets in the first house. This is going to be like a really fired up person. Um, this might also be somebody who has difficulty staying positive, frankly, um, because Mercury being the planet that represents the rational mind, or analytical mind, is in the 12th house of that indicates loss. And so, since they not only need time to retreat, to recharge their batteries and get their energy back, but the other thing is that you have Saturn, a very, very strong Saturn. Saturn is in the 6th house. It's retrograde in its own sign, and that Saturn is aspecting, shining its light on Mercury. Saturn represents things like difficulty, delays, um, doubt, worry, anxiety. So this is somebody who's always going to be worried about the details, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. Yeah, so that's part of this person's makeup, looks like. And also besides the Saturn, we have Jupiter and Rahu aspecting onto Mercury. So that's going to be a lot of mental churning. And then if we flip Mercury and Sun, then we have Mars on Mercury. So, and we also have the Moon. So again, a lot of mental churning, and difficulty staying positive, really. So I think that feeds into the anxiety it seems that this person's experiencing. Um, Normally, when we have Lugnatia is a lord of the Lugna, the planet that rules the Lugna, so in this case, Mercury, when it goes to a negative house, which it does in this case, and we have negative planets on the planet ruling that house as well as the house itself, which we do. We have Sun and Mars on the first house. We have Saturn, Rahu on Mercury. Jupiter's there. Jupiter's not particularly strong. I don't think it's strong enough to cancel that. And Moon is on the first house, but I don't think it's strong enough to cancel out the negative energies. We would typically have what we call an Ava yogi, so somebody who could not be well liked or well respected. And so luckily they do have this parivartana, this exchange of houses between Mercury and Sun, because it brings Mercury back into the house and makes it strong. So, it kind of saves them from having a Ava yogi in their chart. So we also have Moon aspecting the first house. The Moon is full, so it's strong. That's nice. It's an Uttara Bhadrapada. It's also the 11th lord. The 11th house represents income. So this is somebody who is also, besides being rational and analytical, is also intuitive, nurturing, emotional, but might need to withdraw at times. And the reason why I'm saying withdraw is Uttara Bhadrapada is symbolized by the back legs of a funeral cot or funeral pyre. So there's a lot of energy about release, and transformation related to Uttara Bhadrapada. So again, there's another layer of energy here indicating withdrawal. So again, it seems like this person is very stressed and needs to recharge, and we'll get into why potentially. The other thing to know about the first house here, there's a Papa Kartra Yoga on the Lugna. So what does that mean? It means that there are negative planets, malefic planets, and I have a whole video on that. So when you switch Mercury and Sun, you'll get Sun in the 12th house and you'll get K2 over here in the second house, is already in the second house. So Sun in the 12th house, K2 in the second house. That means that there's this mala or kind of necklace of malefic planets surrounding, flanking the first house. And that is indicative of somebody who has to really face difficult circumstances. So there's some pressure on this person. And it looks like, because again, Mars is the main planet representing wealth in this person's chart, because it's the yogi and it's combust, it means that this person is not seeing wealth. That could be literal, that could be figurative, but this person is not seeing wealth, especially if they're a CFO, if they're the one in charge of counting all the money for a big organization, or maybe their organization is a kind of an independent accounting firm or something like that, and they're head of that, then there could be trouble if the books aren't adding up, and that seems to be part of what's going on here. Um, so yeah, again, so there's more of this financial struggles, and also not because Mars is combust, this energy Mars usually represents of like being first and being a pioneer and being courageous. We're not going to be seeing that outwardly. That's going to be under wraps in this person. It might be there inwardly, but it might look to other people like they're actually fairly passive. So that's going to give a different signal or message to people around them. Like they might be seen as somebody who actually doesn't really do that much, when in fact they do quite a bit. It's just they don't express it. So, and the thing is, because Mars is combust, it might be that in this particular moment, because again, there are indications here that this person is up against some pretty, some stress, is having some stress about some pretty serious circumstances. They need to kind of take a step back and gather their strength and courage to face all of this. And then the thing is, because the moon is in a full moon position here, and we have Mercury flipped into the first house, we have Moon in the seventh house. So the rational mind and the intuitive mind are involved with the Sun and Mars, and all that pitta fiery energy. There's going to be transformation of mindsets here. So it could be a release of old mindsets and initiation of new ones. All right, so that's just kind of the general makeup of the person, and kind of some initial indications of what's going on with them at this moment in time. Again, if this was a birth chart of somebody. Um, let's see, then let's move through the houses. We count counterclockwise since this is a North Indian style chart. So the second house, we have K2 there. K2's in Chitra. Again, I mentioned Chitra is symbolized by a gemstone. It indicates things like structure, architecture, construction. And it's aspected by Jupiter. And Jupiter is a planet that represents different things: oration, generosity, intuition, teaching, teachers, publication, also banks. So, more money. And Bharani, it's in Bharani nakshatra, which is the symbol of that is a womb. And so that nakshatra tends to indicate things of the lifestyle, like bringing things to life, especially because this is a benefic planet. This is probably like bringing things to life energy to the second house. The second house represents things like speech as well as savings. So again, more money stuff. And so it looks like here, K2 is also a planet that can represent separation or distance. And so it looks like there's some um, attempt to reestablish communications, because it looks like there might be a communication breakdown here. The third house, it's aspected by Saturn. Saturn's super strong in its own sign, retrograde, and Saturn is in the nakshatra Satabhisha. Satabhisha is translated as 100 healers, and so it can indicate things that are difficult to heal, or and so because Saturn is so strong, the other thing about Saturn is it's a double Chitra for this chart. So that means it's another kind of area of vulnerability, the things that it touches. And so the third house also indicates communication. So again, we have more indications that there's a problem with communications here. Then the fourth house, we have Mars aspecting here. We also have Jupiter and Rahu aspecting here. Rahu is an Ashwini. Ashwini is a nakshatra that is symbolized by the Kumara twins, who are the celestial healers. So there's some major effort, kind of a heroic effort to, I guess, heal home and family, is what I'm seeing here, because there's been an unexpected disruption. That's coming from Rahu. Um, but I actually got that it's more family than home, like literal, like a house, a physical structure, because Jupiter's aspecting into his own sign. Jupiter's aspecting into Sagittarius in the fourth house here. So that means that's a protective aspect for non-living things like a house, like a structural house, but it won't necessarily protect the people that are represented by the house. So it could be mother, although I'm not really seeing mother here, but I could see family and like the the lineage of this person. Um, And because we have Mars and Chitra, we have Rahu and Ashwini, we have Jupiter and Bharani, it's like, again, this person's trying to reestablish order, I think, because again, what this person is dealing with, and we'll get more into that as we go through the rest of the houses on the next slide. There's problems at work, and it looks like there's so much stress involved there that it's spilling over into the relationships. So, not to give away the whole story, just so that it makes sense. Okay, so this is the same setup as the last slide. It's just on the right side here. There's a different text because we're going through the rest of the houses. So then if we move on to the fifth house is fairly quiet, but we do have an aspect by Venus, which is also a Chitra Graha. And again, Venus is the second house lord, so we have more indications that problems with money. And Venus is in a nakshatra called Aslesha. Aslesha is symbolized by a snake. So Venus represents the practical counselor. So again, Venus aspecting into the fifth house here. The fifth house represents intellect and thought processes and stuff. So this is somebody who's a practical counselor by nature. And Venus is also, even though Venus is the second house lord, it's sitting in the 11th house of income. So Venus, so again, if money's always on this person's mind. And I think they do it professionally, is what I'm gathering. So maybe not, um, but probably because again, now that I'm looking at it, the 10th house lord, which is the house of career, is owned by Mercury, and so when Mercury shifts into the first house through that parivartana with the sun, then it looks like this person is fairly prominent in their field. So yeah. Alrighty, so that's how this person thinks. The sixth house is the house of debts, enemies, as well as employees, and we have this massive Saturn sitting here. It's Swa retrograde. So because we have a strong Saturn and Sun sign, that's going to protect the non-living things, so things like debts. But that means that employees are going to be super strong and enemies are going to be super strong, and they may be one and the same, which could very well be because then when you have Saturn in the sixth house here, and then you flip, well, one, if you leave Mercury in the 12th house, that means that employees and enemies are going to be on the mind of this person. It's part of what this person's mind is churning about. When you flip Sun and Mercury, then that means management or leadership is going head to head with employees. And so this could be like a workers' strike. And so what's kind of interesting is I think the last moon, it was a new moon last time, a couple weeks ago, I did a analysis and I just sort of blurted out like, oh, it could be like a workers' strike. And then actually the auto workers, several major plants in the United States went to declared that they were going on strike, I think the very next day. So we have that going on currently in the United States. We also have a Hollywood strike going on. I think the writer's strike just ended, but the actor's strike's still going. And then the other thing is now the government's on verge of shutting down, so that's sort of a strike. So I was like, wow, yeah, all sides here. So it looks like this person's kind of in a management position of some kind of situation like that. Um, but yeah, we have people, major groups striking and a lot of money involved and, negotiations, like going like crazy in many aspects of the United States history and culture right now. So yeah, major, delays and obstacles with employees, enemies. It's all there in the sixth house here. The seventh house, we have Moon. That's an Uttara Bhadrapada I mentioned. We have Sun aspecting, Mars aspecting, Mercury aspecting when you flip the Sun and Mercury. The seventh Lord is also Jupiter, which is in the eighth house. Because the seventh lord has gone to a negative house, you have a negative planets on Jupiter. You have Saturn and Rahu on Jupiter. Saturn's super strong. And you have all these negative planets, Mars, Sun. Mercury is going to be negative in this chart because Mercury can swing either way. It can be either benefic or malefic. But depending on who it associates with, it can swing either way. And because it's going to be, when it flips into the first house, it's going to be with Mars. So it's going to be a malefic planet. So you have a lot of malefics on the seventh house, and then you have the seventh lord gone to a negative house with malefics on it. This is what we call a Dushkriti yoga. So it's a bhava yoga or house yoga, a combination of planets. And that can mean that there's difficulty with the relationships here. Typically, the seventh house represents a spouse. So that's where, like I was mentioning, there might be difficulties at home with the primary relationship, even if it's not a spouse, it's like a spouse-like relationship or a pretty serious relationship, life partner type thing. Um, the other thing it could be, the seventh house also represents independent business, which I think is possible for this person, and business relationships, business partnerships, which I think is definitely true for this person. So there's a lot of, again, negative energy going on in the seventh house here. Because we have the moon here and it's in Pisces, the constellation of the seventh house is Pisces. That's a water sign. So this is going to be a much more emotional and even spiritual, because it's ruled by Jupiter, type of spouse, if we're looking at spouse or business or something like that, or even business partnerships. It means that there's going to be kind of a fundamental difference in the nature of this person who's very analytical, doing things by the book, very detail oriented, and the more emotional, spiritual nature of people that they work with or their spouse. But the thing too is that Venus, which is the karaka or the symbol of the seventh house, so the kind of the living symbol, the jiva karaka of the seventh house, is in Aslesha, that nakshatra symbolized by a snake. That means that Venus is kind of off a little bit out of the picture here. You can see it's kind of on the line of all these arrows I've drawn with all the aspects for the different planets. Venus is kind of off to the side, and like a snake, it looks like Venus is kind of off on their own, potentially healing a bit. Again, this might kind of get at some, because of the difficulties gone here, might be a bit of strange, like the spouse or partner might be kind of off healing their wounds or licking their wounds, because this stress in this Virgo person's life is affecting their primary relationship, looks like. Um, but the other thing is that also means that, because that the symbol of the Karaka, Venus, has gone to the fifth house of the seventh house. That means the partner is also looking for practical solutions to not necessarily all the work issues that the Virgo person's having, but at least their relationship. Because I think it's difficult because, again, this person is churning in their mind. And I think the partner is looking for more emotional release or relief, rather than like some practical, by the book solution. Practical by the book solution, I don't think is what the situation is calling for. I'll get more into that. And the other thing is that because like you have all these planets on the 1-7 axis, that means that these people are mirroring each other. So they both need a break. They both need a vacation. They're both looking for practical solutions, but there's some kind of stalemate, it looks like here. They keep running around in circles, and not really getting very far. The other thing about the seventh house is, like the Lugna, there's a Papakartra yoga, or flanking of negative planets on either side of the seventh house. So you have this massively strong Saturn in the 12th house to the seventh house, and then you have Rahu in the second house to the seventh house. So again, you have this necklace of malefic planets on the seventh house. So there's some stress, some circumstances that this seventh house is facing. So whether that's independent business, business partners, and or spouse, there's stress on them as well. Ninth house fairly quiet, 10th house fairly quiet. 11th house, we have Venus here, again, practical solutions, and this is the house of income. So Venus is, again, this Aslesha nakshatra symbolized by a snake. I think this snake is in its cave, kind of hiding out a little bit. The other thing is you can see Venus is almost flipping into the 12th house, which it will, I think, on October 1st, so just a few days away. And the 12th house is the house of loss, as well as isolated places. So, more indications that the spouse, partner of this person, more on the personal realm, is a bit in retreat mode, withdrawn, perhaps estranged, or some level of separation. Even maybe it's just communication. Maybe communication's dropped off. That's possible. So, and then the 12th house here, we have Mercury, we have Sun. When you do the parivartana, it's also aspected by Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn. So again, spending a lot of time thinking about how to improve the situation, because when you put the Sun in here, that's going to help protect some of the stuff around loss of non-living things. So things like money and property, that's going to help. But I don't think, even though that seems to be the surface level issue, money, I don't think that's the real issue here. And I'll get into that as we dig deeper here. What I think the real issue is that this is an emotional issue, and it's to some degree about shame and embarrassment. You have this massively strong Saturn on the mind, Mercury. Saturn can symbolize things like anxiety, embarrassment, skepticism, humiliation. So I don't know if I didn't get into this, but whatever the situation is, I don't know if it's this person specifically, but whatever the situation is bringing a lot of shame and embarrassment to this person. And I don't know if it's because they specifically made some sort of mistake, like with the counting the books or something. But something in this situation is really deeply affecting them, and the people around them. And what I was getting from this is that because this person, just by their nature, tends to go up into their head and organize and figure things out to create order, that's probably their tendency in this situation. But the thing is, it's really like more of an emotional or even spiritual issue. And so you can't really heal the heart with, lining up the books or lining up the numbers. So I think what this person needs to do is to drop into their heart, so that they could be in more of a feeling or empathic space to move ahead. Because even though it seems like the issue is money here, it's really more about how do people feel, like money's just kind of the symbol, that's just like the obvious thing that's being argued about, or there's a struggle about that. But what does money represent to people? So if this is like a family situation and people are arguing about money, what does money mean to this Virgo person versus what does it mean to the Pisces person? Maybe for the Virgo person, it's about security and being right, and being responsible. And maybe for the Pisces person, it's about, having time to relax and having some work-life balance. And the money gives you time to spend with your loved ones. Money means different things to different people, and it offers people different things that they value. If this is more of a work situation, like a boss-employee struggle, then what is the money on the table? Because it looks like they're arguing about money. What does money mean to the boss, and what does money mean to the employees? And so the reason why they're fighting so hard here and they're going head to head is because for the boss, it means Some bosses, I'm not sure it's the case in this situation, but some bosses, they're trying to pad their own pocket. I mean, I get that. But if they're responsible leader of the firm or organization, they don't want to give all the money away to employee benefits and payouts because, you know, what if like another pandemic hits or something like that, and they don't have enough deep cash in their pockets to survive a hit like that? Then the whole ship sinks, and then there's no employment. They're all out, on the street essentially. I mean, not literally, but figuratively. Um, so that's what the upper management's potentially trying to balance if they're good management, and they're not always good. They don't have the best intentions. That's true. But for the employees, they may be literally struggling for survival. They may also be struggling for dignity or respect. Um, so I think that's the real issue here is that the Virgo person and then these other people, these other Pisces people, the Pisces people, whether it's spouse or employees, are actually trying to satisfy emotional needs of closeness, like spending time together or respect. Whereas the Virgo person is more in their head of just, well, the books are right. This is what we need to do. Like we can only afford this. Like they're again being fairly potentially rigid about it. Um, because the other thing is this Virgo person's in charge of the purse, it looks like, whether for a firm or the house or something like that. So they may feel like people are challenging their way of doing work or whatever. So those are the things that are really it's at play here and kind of people are fighting for, even though it seems like it's maybe about dollars. It's it's about deeper things. So the thing is that if this Virgo person is able to manage to drop into their heart and be more in their kind of feeling space in their body and in their mind, um, then they might have a way out of this in terms of if like the employees, if what employees are really looking for is respect and they're equating respect with money, is there another way to provide respect for the employees besides money if money's truly tight? I don't know. I mean, well, I looked at it. We'll look at the next slide. I was like, well, I don't know. Is money actually tight? Like, is there literally like the firm hasn't been doing well, and so there's not that much money, and so they can't do it, or what's the deal? I looked at that, but let's just say that, there's some money there, like how are we going to divide up the pot, essentially, the pot of money? Um, is there another way, if what the employees are truly fighting about is respect, is there another way to offer that respect if money is truly not available? Like maybe it's about time off, or maybe it's about flex hours, or more, maybe it's about I don't know, providing childcare or something that's going to be less monetarily costly than just straight payouts for people. Yeah. Or if it's a personal relationship, I mean, if that person is looking for closeness, maybe a Virgo person is keeping a grip on the purse strings here, but there are lots of ways to be close with somebody without spending a lot of money. So maybe the issue isn't really the money. Maybe it's just the Pisces person just wants more time. I don't know. Netflix and chill is all it's really required here. Like it could be something like that, I mean, not for everybody, but it's something like that. So by dropping into the heart, it would give this person new perspectives on really what the other people were seeking and to start thinking outside the box beyond just the, dotted line of the adding up the money figures and stuff. Like, how's another way to satisfy the needs of people besides a monetary payout if that's not possible? So that's what's going on with Virgo person here. And it brought to mind, this might sound a little bit funny, but it brought to mind, for some reason, I felt like I was supposed to share an experience I've had. So that corresponds with this. So at some point in my life, I went on a leadership retreat, and as part of that leadership retreat, we were actually people in the retreat. We were allowed, allowed to work with a horse whisperer. And so what happened there was there's a little pen for the horse, just a small round pen. And all of us people in the retreat, and most of us had no idea, had no knowledge or any experience with horses. But the person who was in charge of the horse brought each of us one by one into the ring with the horse and gave us the lead, the rope that was around the horse's on attached to the horse's bridle and stuff. And without any other instruction, they said, "Okay, get the horse to walk around in circles in the circular pen." Okay, so what was interesting, you know, so what does this have to do with story? I'll get to that. But anyway, so each of us one by one went in there, and it was kind of hilarious because each of us had a different approach because clearly none of us knew what we were actually doing. We had no experience with the horses, but we're like, how do we get this massive animal to like move in a circle? And so, and we each had a different approach. Like some people would try to like, pull on the rope, and so, or what have you, or they would just look there confused, so they didn't know what to do. So my approach was sort of funny. I tried to reason with the horse, which is like, so when the reason why we're doing this is it was a way to demonstrate to us what are our natural instincts when we come up against a situation that we're not familiar with, and how do we handle it? So for me, I went into my rational mind and I started trying to reason with I literally started reasoning. I was like, okay, horse, why don't we just move slowly through the ring, in circles, and the horse is just looking at me like, okay, lady, wasn't moving at all, didn't take a step. And I'm like, okay, horsey, come on, I'm trying to like sort of, encourage the horse. So that was step two, I think. The horse is still looking at me like, no, lady, this isn't doing it for me. And then I went inside and I was like, okay, I had this funny thought. I was like, if I was the horse, what would get me to move around the ring? And the thing is, just by having the thought, what would I do if I was in the horse's shoes? So if once I dropped into my heart and once I dropped into this energy of empathy, the horse on its own magically started moving around in a circle, and it was like shocking to me. Okay. But that whole experience with the horse, and that's why they have leaders work with horse whispers and stuff like that, is because you discover, in very short amount of time, how you naturally kind of approach problems and what are the energy shifts. Because, especially even though it's a big animal, animals especially are very sensitive to energies. And so when you shift your energy, the animal picks up on that and they respond to your energy. So once I dropped into my heart and into more of a, oh, whoa, if I was a horse, what would make me move? The horse moved on their own. And so I think that's the kind of thing that this Virgo person needs, because it looks like this person naturally is so much in their head that what they really need to do is drop into their heart and be like, okay, what is my spouse really asking me for? What are my employees really asking me for? Um, and is there another way to get them what they're asking for besides money, if money is really an issue? So that's that. But we'll look at that. Is money really an issue? So I went as the amsas. These are the subzodiacs, and I was looking at because it was a little unclear which relationships were most kind of in limbo here because of the situation. So I looked at relationships, like the spouse especially, and then work, just to see what was going on there, what the energies were there, to see if it was more of a personal relationship or work relationship that was in trouble here, because it seemed like both potentially. So again, the Dasha sequence here at this moment in time is Saturn, Moon, Ketu. What's also important to note about that is that we're going to be in Saturn, Moon, Ketu through most of October until October 28th. And we're going to have two eclipses. So this K2 is really important. That's going to be that there's going to be some unexpected, sudden left turns and events going on related to the situation. Right. Then on October 28th, we're switching into Saturn and Venus. So Venus, it kind of goes along with what I've been saying. So if we look at Saturn, Moon, K2, Saturn and K2 are planets that indicate separation and distance. The moon is the mind, especially the emotional mind. And with Saturn, Moon, K2, this could be like mental health, anxiety, that kind of stuff. So that seems like what Virgo is experiencing here. And then Saturn, Moon, Venus. So then you switch. So you still have Saturn there. There's still trouble. But now you have Moon and Venus. These are the two emotional planets. Venus also represents spouse, practical counsel, socializing. So there's this, it looks like there's going to be a shift from some sort of separation or estrangement to more of a kind of a smoothing over and building the bridges, towards the end of the month. Then after that, we're going to be in that Saturn, Moon, Venus period for a while. And then 2nd of February, Groundhog's Day, 2024, we're going to move into Saturn, Moon, Sun. So then, the sun represents, again, authority, leadership, that sort of thing. So what I'm seeing just from the way the Dasha sequence is playing out over the next few months is there's an estrangement, there is like a reestablishment of kind of emotional goodwill, and then there are learning lessons that management's going to get from all this. Okay, so let's look at the top chart here. This is the Navamsha or D9. This represents relationships. So we're going to look at the planets that are playing out here. So we're going to look at Saturn, Moon, K2, because that's what we're currently running. Or the Moon is currently, this person's chart is currently running if it was a chart. Then we're going to look at Venus because we're going to shift into Venus on October 28th. And we're going to look at Sun because we're shifting to that February 2nd. So in Navamsha, so again, spouse-like relationships, we have Saturn in the 12th house. So again, retreat and worry, which we got in the natal chart. So it, correlates there. We have Moon and Ketu together in the 10th house of work. So, Ketu on the Moon, mental health, stress, separation. So mental distance, stress at work. And 10th house represents work. But I think there is some goodwill here, heart and spirit wise, because we have Jupiter there. It's retrograde. And Jupiter, you see this double-sided saffron arrow. Jupiter's in parivartana, exchange of houses with Venus. So if you bring Venus here to the 10th house, so Venus and Jupiter are both benefic planets. So there's some goodwill coming here. Venus is in the third house. The third house in a amsha indicates usually an end or a change. And again, because you have this parivartana between Jupiter and Venus, you have Venus in Pisces here. The third house is the 12th constellation here. You can see the 12, little 12 in the corner. So Venus is exalted here. So Venus is going to be super strong. And then when you do the parivartana, you get Jupiter back in here. So there's going to be, I think, a happy ending for the personal relationship with this person, at least by the end of the month. And that's going to bring, I think, a strained communication back online. Let's see. So again, if you're resonating with the storyline at all, you have to look at your own chart. You can't just go by this, but you can almost kind of see this as like an update, potentially, semi-out chart. Then the sun, again, we're not moving into that until February, but look, the sun is exalted. So, and that's in the 4th house. So strong management, strong leadership, but it may take a while for them to see the lessons of this experience. It might be that they kind of have to, once the smoke clears and they have time to actually sit back and say, okay, what do we actually learn from all this? I think that'll be a good thing for both the managers and the organization. The other thing to note here is there's a parivartana exchange of houses between the 9th lord and the 11th lord, so Mercury and Mars. So the 9th house represents authority, government. So and the 11th house represents income, money. So arguments, because Mars is a kind of a combative planet. Mercury is business, so strain about business, money, authority, money, that sort of thing. So you can see all this here. So there is some strain and kind of isolation, separation. But I think that, especially with the parivartana between Venus and Jupiter, it looks like the personal relationship is going to see some improvement by the end of October. Then if we look at the Dashamsha, this is the D10, this represents work career. This is much more, how do I say, stressed. So I think the main stress, when I compare these two charts, the D9 and the D10, most of the stress comes from the D10, but I think all the stress from the D10 is spilling over into the D9, and that's the problem with the spouse. I don't think it's originating with the spouse. I just think the spouse is unfortunately collateral damage in all this, the relationship with the spouse. But again, look, we have Saturn in the 12th house. And here, Saturn's worse off. It's debilitated because it's in Aries. So it's even more isolation, more frustration, more delays, more obstacles, retreat and worry. So both of these subcharts correlate with the natal chart. Moon is in the 10th house, so it's still at work in the house of work, in the chart of work. And there's a parivartana between Mars and Saturn. So if you switch Saturn and Mars here, that means you have a super strong Saturn on the moon. So again, we're getting anxiety, doubt, skepticism, a lot of mental churning and worry and, anxiety, anger, due to work issues. The other thing is that the 12th house represents hidden enemies. So when you bring Mars into the 12th house here, it's going to make that 12th house strong. It means you're going to have really strong enemies, and a loss is due to enemies as well as labor, because Mars typically represents blue collar work as well as Saturn. So yeah, so there's some loss there. K2 in this D10 is in the 6th house. So the 6th house represents things like debt and enemies. So unexpected acute issues with debt and enemies. Yep, some more of that. And then we have Venus in the 8th house here. The 8th house in the Amsha subchart, subzodiac, also represents change and endings, but this is more of a permanent kind of change and ending. So, but once again, you have a parivartana between Venus and Jupiter. So that's nice. It makes Venus stronger, it makes Jupiter stronger. The other thing is that in the sub zodiacs, you can, if you use IR analysis, this Jupiter actually lifts up Venus, because in the IR analysis, which is different from sort of classic analysis, um, you have what's called a Shubh Sankhya Yoga. There's a relationship between Jupiter and Venus here, and they will lift each other up. So that brings again some grace into all of this stuff that's going on. These challenges going on. And then you have Sun, Swa in its own sign in the 4th house. So again, management's strong, leadership is strong here. But again, it's going to shift, right? So you're going to look at the Saturn, Moon, K2 first. So you have, Saturn in the 12th house, K2 in 6th. That's going to be stressful, especially on the mind. And then you switch from K2 to Venus, so you're going to start to see some changeover here. That's going to looks like it's a positive changeover. And then in February, it's going to shift to Sun. So there's going to be sort of a short-term resolution, and then there's going to be kind of a follow-up with that. So again, the work situation seemed much more difficult, challenging, and that's what's really causing the problem here. But let's look at money. So then I looked at the subzodiacs for income and assets. So the income one is the Rudramsha or D11, and then assets, so kind of bigger assets, like, I guess if we're talking a company, like major assets like the building itself, if they own it, vehicles, if they own it, plant equipment, if they own it, major bank accounts, um, retirement accounts, that sort of thing, stocks, bonds, any of that stuff. Big stuff, not necessarily, day-to-day or month-to-month income. So, the Rudramsha, D11. So in this one, so if this is income, we have Saturn in the 11th house, Swa retrograde, and the 11th house represents income. So money's good, income's good. So I don't think it's a matter of there's not enough money. It's just a matter of, I think, what they're doing, partly what they're doing with the money, and what's being perceived that they're doing with the money here, the management. Whether the management is actually full management, like for a corporation, or whether it's Virgo managing household expenses, or the household purse, or something like that. So, so that's Saturn, and Saturn, you see there's a arrow here. Saturn is aspecting onto the first house, the Lugna. So there is some stress here, though, with the income, because again, if you're an employee for a company, and most employees don't know all the nitty gritty, all the accounts that a company owns. They kind of just know the superficial, like, oh, they might see the numbers going up, and they're like, well, if the numbers are going up, why isn't my paycheck going up? Um, and so when the money goes up, it's like, well, where's my cut? So that's how the mind can go. And so the fact that there's actually profit here is causing a problem, because people don't feel like they're being appropriately compensated for their contribution to the profit making. Um, so the money's good. Money's coming in. The moon is in the ninth house. So that's in government authority. But the moon in this case is new. It's not a strong moon. We also have Venus aspecting across here. So, and the ninth house represents the government authority. You also have the sun in the ninth house. The sun in the ninth house forms what we call a karako bhava. That's not, it might sound good because sun represents authority. It's a planet that represents authority, and the house, ninth house represents authority. And so planet and the house representing authority together sounds like a good idea, but actually it's almost kind of too much energy. And so there's going to be issues with authority here. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Let me backtrack a little bit. So I talked about the moon. I got into the ninth house because of the moon, but K2 is right here at the top of the chart. So that's going to be a lot of unusual, ambitious masses, explosive energy, not well organized, especially because you have Saturn aspecting here, and Saturn is debilitated in the first house. The K2 is Swa in the first house. We only use in its owns a first house. We only use that in the subcharts, or at least that's how I was trained. So you have this ambitious, like worker group, explosive, not well organized. So a lot of, drama and trauma, it looks like. Venus in the third house again. So that's what's interesting, is Venus is in either the third house or the eighth house for all these charts. So again, it looks like there's going to be some change or ending to all of this, potentially at the end of October. That was what was interesting for all the charts. Venus, that once you move into that period, there's going to be a shift, it looks like. But Venus, in this case, in the third house, looks like it will be, some kind of change or end, or at least, and it looks like there's a communication strain at work. That's part of what's going on here. And then I talked about the sun being an issue because of the Karko Bhavanasha. So it looks like there's an influx of money, but the issues are like, how are the leaders of this organization distributing the money? And it looks like because of the K2 up in the front, in the top house here, the first house, there's a power grab. So again, it's not necessarily about money. Money is kind of the currency or exchange or the symbol of what people are really fighting for. And I think in this case, it looks like people are really fighting for power. Um, so yeah, so that was interesting. But it looks like money's coming in. So then we looked at the Chatratamsha, the D4. So there's a signal here that this chart is very important because it's the same lugna. It's also a Virgo lugna. You can see the little six circled here. So it's a Virgo lugna rising chart as the natal chart is. So that means this chart is particularly important for the person whose chart you're reading. So again, it's sort of like exclamation point on this chart. So where's Saturn? Saturn's in the sixth house, like the natal chart. So again, strong enemies, and but also protection of debts. And since we're talking about assets here, it looks like the real issue is that even though money's coming in, what may not be apparent to people, whether it's a spouse, if it's a personal relationship we're talking about, or if it's like a organization, like a work organization, is that it looks like Virgo person has themselves or is in charge of covering the debts of this organization. And that's what people don't necessarily see or quite understand. They think they're getting like ripped off because they're not getting paid when they see the profits coming in, but they don't recognize that there's apparently a lot of debt that the organization has. And that's the problem. That's part of the reason why, because again, if the management pays out all this profit to the workers, they can't pay off the debt. They might go into default and then lose the organization, and they're all, in trouble. So that's part of what's not obvious here. Then the moon, that's the second planet. That's in the 10th house. So again, work, career. It's with Mars and Sun is on it too. So you have these two Pitta planets, fire planets on the moon. So there's anger here. So I don't know if that's this CFO uncovered some debt that wasn't seen before. Because even in the beginning, when I mentioned Mars was combust, there's some wealth that's not being seen here. And so, what might have been lost either by the CFO or maybe the workers, maybe both, is that there's the financial underpinnings of this organization are not strong, and so debts need to be paid off, and that's why workers can't get more. Part of the reason why, besides the fact that again, you want to make sure you know make sure you have enough savings for a rainy day or a pandemic or something like that. Otherwise, you're gonna all close your doors, and then nobody gets paid, right? So, K2 in this case is in the second house, much like the first, the natal chart. So again, hidden issues around banks and savings, and now Jupiter's in the second house instead of the eighth house. But either way, you have some Jupiterian energy on the second house. So again, if this is debt, it might be bank debt. Like, you don't want this organization to go into default. And that's what maybe the Virgo person is not sharing and worried about, and maybe hasn't shared because they're embarrassed or something about this. Maybe because they made a mistake, or maybe they know that they're in debt and they just don't want to share that, for whatever reason. So yeah, so again, debt, bank issues looks like. And again, we're talking about assets, so this isn't like, a couple of, like pocket change here. These are big bills, potentially. So, and then we have Venus in the eighth house again, so change and end. But this time, this change or end doesn't have the same kind of, like on the last slide when I looked at spouse and work. This Venus is different because you do have Jupiter on it. That's nice, but this is a funny thing. In the subchart, actually Jupiter is the sole enemy of Venus. So when you have Jupiter aspecting on a Venus, that's actually not a good thing. It's not positive. It actually brings Jupiter down. It actually, because it's sole enemy, you can literally think that there's going to be like struggle, arguments, between people because of this. So what I'm seeing here is that there may be long-term unintended consequences of relationships and feelings because of the way that this whole thing played out. So even if there wasn't an intention to hide money or debt or whatever, um, maybe this person or the management were just saying, "Oh, we can't afford it," and people didn't believe them or whatever, and maybe they thought, "Okay, they're not being on, management or Virgo person or whatever is not being honest with us. We can't trust them," and then it creates a lot of ill will. So because the problem is that people didn't really know the whole story here potentially. Um, So not only is Jupiter the sole enemy of Venus, so that creates struggle, but Venus is the sole enemy of Rahu, and they're in the same house here in the eighth house. So there's a lot of fallout from this whole situation. There's a lot of long-term ill will and probably breakup of relationships. again, especially related to work. And then you have this super strong Saturn aspecting Venus. That doesn't help because Saturn is the great malefic planet and it brings obstacles, delays, that sort of thing. And the other thing is that, again, if you're doing IR analysis here, the Saturn and Venus create what's called a Papsankhya yoga. So it's actually going to sink Venus even more. So yeah, that's going to be a tricky bit. So you have this two soul enemies going on in Venus, a Papsankhya yoga. Venus is going to struggle here, even, so that might cause some financial difficulties and possibly relationship issues. Um, yeah, so that's going to be a little bit tough. So what this all brought to my mind is it's kind of like, again, getting back to Virgo, who's again this very heady intellectual person, does it by the books, detail oriented. If that's their nature and that's their way of doing things and they're, rewarded for that, I mean, if they're like a CFO type, how do you quantify things like relationships and closeness and goodwill? I think that's what came up for me is that, would it have been better to be honest about if there was this accounting mistake that was made or to maybe reveal, and it's hard because if it's a big company, they don't necessarily want to tell the whole world they're like up to their nose in debt. Because then their stock's gonna, maybe their stock numbers are gonna plummet, their stock price is gonna plummet. You don't know how that's gonna go. Mm, so it's kind of like, some of these things you can quantify and put on the books and calculate, but a lot of these things, like the goodwill of your employees, if your employees or your spouse doesn't really trust you, I don't know, like sometimes it's hard to really truly fully recover from that if it's really bad. Um, so I think that's the issue. And then that brought up another, I felt like I was supposed to share another story, to kind of, exemplify the energy a little bit here. So I did take this negotiation class at one point in my life, and I think there were about 25 of us in the class, and there are a couple of guys in the class who were quite aggressive. So in this negotiations class, they used to give us these kind of games to play, negotiation games where there were like points, you got points, you scored different points or whatever. And so the key or the goal was to try to win points. And then, at the end of the session, they would list like who got the most points and things like that. So typically one of these two guys that was pretty aggressive was almost always at the top. And when people were discussing the story and their negotiation strategies, like you could tell this guy was super aggressive and was just like grabbing, squeezing whatever they could out of this person until they were like screaming for mercy. And again, this is just a game. I mean, it wasn't like nothing, it wasn't like real money, it wasn't real assets, it wasn't real anything. It was just this guy was just about going for the jugular and make like I don't know, like sadistic. Like I don't know, just like to feel that kind of power, I guess, and just kind of hurt people that way and sort of humiliate them. Like that was just they did that with everybody. And so I typically did well in the class. I was usually like third, so I wasn't first because this guy, this really aggressive guy was first because he was just like merciless people in negotiations, which I guess he sort of saw himself as like the big, macho guy or something, whatever. But my approach was always like, how do I get what I want and also give people what they're looking for and try to find a win-win. I guess that was always my approach. And so I did pretty well. Um, because I tend to be fairly creative, so I would think outside the box, like, oh, okay, they're looking for this, so how can I give them this, even if I can't give them exactly what they thought they wanted, but we're both still happy at the end. We walk away happy, and we still want to like, potentially, if it was a real world situation, do business with each other, you know, because I don't tend to like to burn bridges, if I can help it. So anyway, it ended up one day that I was in one of these games with this guy and his buddy, who was just about the same as him. Like they were the two biggest bullies in the class. So, whatever our game was, it was something like I had a piece, like some sort of asset, and they had assets. And the only way for us to all get points or the maximum points was for us to work together. And so the two of them had enough. I had the biggest individual piece of asset or property or whatever it was. I can't remember. And the two of them, though, together had a majority, but they didn't have enough without me to actually win any points. So they still needed to um, acquire my property to get any points for themselves. So anyway, they basically got in my face and they said, "Give us your property, and we're giving you nothing. We're just gonna basically grab your property and leave you with nothing." So, like that's literally like almost how they said it, and I was just like, "Wow, is this for real?" Okay. So I said, "Well, you know what? I mean, you guys can't win this game unless we all work together. So unless you can find a different solution, then I'm not playing this game the way that you want. I'm just not doing it." And then they were trying to, they use different like manipulation tactics or whatever. And I said, "Look, I told you, unless we work together in a benevolent way, I'm not playing this game. So I'm just going to sit here and we're going to watch the clock, because we had a time limit. So like, we're just going to sit here and watch the clock run down if this is all you can offer." And they were just like, looking at me, looking at each other. They couldn't believe it because I was just like not playing the game because they assumed that I was going to be sweating it because if we didn't work together, I was going to get 0 points and they were going to get 0 points. And I was like, you know what? I don't really care about 0 points because it's like what matters more to me was like not giving in to basically getting screwed over by these guys and being publicly humiliated because that's really what they were going for. Not only were they trying to get like the most points, but they were just trying to, show how really kind of powerful they were and they wanted to intimidate me and all this kind of, and I was like, I'm not playing this game. So I'm just going to sit here. We're going to watch the clock run down. I don't care. And they couldn't believe it. And they like literally to the last second, they thought at the last second, I was just like, tick tock, okay, we're done. We all get 0. It's just that was my attitude. And then we go into the classroom and we all had to report our scores. And so, I said I got 0. And then they also had to say they got 0. And everybody started laughing because everybody knew these guys and their way of going through things, and they were just laughing because they're like, wow, instead of getting the top points, they got none. So it actually kind of switched turned the tables on them, and they were the ones who were embarrassed because they realized somebody didn't give in to their manipulation tactics or whatever. And even it was kind of funny because even the professor was like actually like sort of trying not to laugh. They were trying to be professional and just be objective, but you could tell that they were kind of laughing too. Because actually these two guys were aggressive with the professor as well and tried to humiliate him as well. I mean, they were just off the hook, these two, just on a rampage, So anyway, and then what was interesting. And I was just like, I don't care. I'm not going to let these guys roll all over me. It's not worth it. I mean, I'm going to lose anyway. And then I'm going to lose not only my property or points, but then I'm going to be humiliated too. Like, no thanks. But it's just like, and then I allowed it to happen. So no, but no thanks. But what was interesting was the professor then started talking about the metagame. And I think the reason why I'm bringing all this up, besides it being a little bit of a funny story, is that that's what this whole negotiation, challenging circumstance for this Virgo person. And again, if we're going to extrapolate out to the government shutdown, auto workers strike, Hollywood strike in the United States, what are people really fighting over? Is it really dollars? Some of it, yes, but but even deeper than that, what do these dollars represent? And it's kind of like this, with these bully guys in my class, trying to manipulate me or whatever. What they were really going for was power and control and being, this big shot or whatever. And I wasn't playing that game. Um, dignity to me was more important than whatever 10 points on a game board that nobody's going to remember. The other reason why I bring up this negotiations class is that, we were in this class for a semester. And again, this is just all playtime, it's just a game in class or whatever, but people remembered these guys and the tables turned, not just with me. I think that was kind of the first big one. But by the end of the semester, you could see other people were really upset, even though on the surface they're like, haha, that's so funny, blah, blah, blah. But you could see like the revenge coming back from people because these guys were just going around like basically just trying to screw people over and screw with their heads and like humiliate them. And that all came back around to them. So people do not forget, how you treat them and how you talk to them and like your intentions and things like that. And so, again, maybe this Virgo person, I don't know, again, if there was some mistake that was under their charge that happened or whatever, but I think coming clean and being honest about where things are at, uh, that might be part of what's needed here. Because again, the long-term fallout, sometimes you can't ever fully recover from that. And what's the cost of that? You can't count that. You can't quantify that kind of intangible social equity and goodwill. Yeah. So again, you have Sun here in the fourth house, not as strong as the other charts, but it's in a positive house at least. So again, long-term learning. What did you learn from all this? So, and the other thing is that, it's not just I think about empathy of management for workers and what they're experiencing and them feeling like they're getting ripped off or something, like they're not being compensated adequately, but empathy for the management, because management has to figure out, how to um, um, how do I say, allot money, right, to different projects. How much do we save for a rainy day? How much do we invest in some entrepreneurial thing that we don't know if it's ever going to pay off and it's just going to be a huge loss? I mean, those are all big decisions that need to be made by some of the people at the top. So that's not easy either. And then people always blame them, they're easy scapegoats. That's usually how it goes. So, it's really important as part of the empathy too, is like to really try to get to know the whole story. And that's hard if the other person isn't forthcoming, and you ask and you dig, but you don't get anything back. Then it's sort of like, well, what was I really honest about the whole situation? Does this person have the whole story, or was only part of the story part of what fueled this estrangement? Um, and then, we're all in the same boat together. So we also, the workers have to also have to consider like how much can the central organization give to the workers before there's a big hole in the boat and the boat can't be maintained and sail through the waters, the choppy waters of life sometimes, right? Because they come about. So, yeah. Okay, so that was a Vedic astrology analysis of the full moon coming up in a few days. As always, I want to thank you for your time and your support of my work and this channel, your interest in Vedic astrology. All of my teaching videos are in the concepts playlists. If you're interested in individual birth chart reading, I do them on Zoom. You can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that includes other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as things like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care. So thank you for all your kind comments, your questions, all the new subscribers. I really appreciate your feedback and support. And as always, I hope you found this interesting, useful as you navigate the energy cycles of your life. So until the next one, take care.